Hello and welcome back, my Lovecraftians. You're in for a treat today. We'll be reading The Tomb by HP Lovecraft, so get comfortable. In relating the circumstances which have led to my confinement within the refuge of and for the demented, I am aware that my present position will create a natural doubt of the authenticity of my narrative. It is an unfortunate fact that the bulk of humanity is too limited in the mental vision to weigh with patience and intelligence those isolated phenomenons, seen and felt only by a psychologically sensitive few, which lie outside its common experience. Men of broader intellect know that there is no sharp distinction betwixt the real and the unreal, that all things appear as they do only by virtue of the delicate individual physical and mental media through which we are made conscious of them. But the prosmatic materialism of the majority condemns as madness the flash of supersight which penetrates the common veil of obvious empiricism. My name is Jarvis Dudley, and from the earliest of childhood I have been a dreamer and a visionary, wealthy beyond the necessities of a commercial life and temporarily unfitted for the formal studies and social recreations of my acquaintances. I have dwelt ever in realms apart from the visible world, spending my youth and adolescence in ancient and little-known books, and in roaming the fields and groves of the region near my ancestral home. I do not think that what I read in those books or saw in these fields and groves was exactly what other boys read and saw there, but of this I must say little, since detailed speech would but confirm those cruel slanders upon the intellect which I sometimes overhear from the whispers of the stealthy attendants around me. It is sufficient for me to relate events without analyzing causes. I have said I dwelt apart from the visible world, but I have not said that I dwelt alone. This no human creature may do, for lacking the fellowship of the living. He inevitably draws upon the companionship of things that are not, or are no longer living. Close by my home there lies a singular wooden hollow, in whose twilight deeps I spent most of my time, reading, thinking, and dreaming. Down its moss-covered slopes my first steps of infancy were taken, and around its grotesquely gnarled oak trees my first fancies of boyhood were woven. Well did I come to know the presiding dryads of those trees, and often have I watched their wild dances in the struggling beams of a waning moon. But of these things I must not now speak. I will tell only of the lone tomb in the darkest of the hillside thickets, the deserted tomb of the Hydes, an old and exalted family, whose last direct descendant had been laid within its black recesses many decades before my birth. The vault to which I refer is of ancient granite, weathered and discolored by the mists and dampness of generations. Excavated back into the hillside, the structure is visible only at the entrance. The door, a ponderous and forbidding slab of stone, hangs upon rusted iron hinges and fastened ajar in a queerly sinister way by means of heavy iron chains and padlocks, according to the gruesome fashion of half a century ago. The abode of the race whose scions are inhered had once crowded the declivity which holds the tombs, but had long since fallen victim to the flames which sprang up from a disastrous stroke of lightning, of the midnight storm which destroyed this gloomy mansion. The older inhabitants of the region sometimes speak in hushed and uneasy voices, alluding to what they call divine wrath, in a manner that as later years vaguely increased the only strong fascination which I felt for the forest-dark spectre. One man only had perished in the fire. When the last of the Hydes was buried in this place of shade and stillness, the sad urnful of ashes had come from a distant land to which the family had repaired when the mansion burned down. No one remains to lay flowers before the granite portal, and few care to brave the depressing shadows which seem to linger strangely about the water-worn stones. I shall never forget the afternoon which first I stumbled upon the half-hidden house of death. It was in midsummer, when the alchemy of nature transmutes the Sylvian landscape to one vivid and almost homogeneous mass of green, when the senses are well nigh intoxicated with the surging seas of moist vinder and subtly indefinable odors of the soil and the vegetations. In such surroundings, the mind loses its perspective. Time and space become trivial and unreal, and echoes of forgotten prehistoric past beat insistently upon the enthralled consciousness. All day, I have been wandering through the mystic groves of the hollow, thinking thoughts I need not discuss, and conversing with things I need not name. In years, a child of 10, I had seen and heard many wonders unknown to the throng, and was oddly aged in certain ways, when upon forcing my way between two savage consabriere, I suddenly encountered the entrance of the vault. I had no knowledge of what I had discovered. The dark blocks of granite, the door so curiously ajar, and the funeral carvings above the arch aroused in me no association of mournful or terrible character. Of graves and tombs I knew and imagined much, but had, on account of my peculiar temperament, been kept from all personal contact with churchyards and cemeteries. The strange stone house on the woodland slope was to me only a source of interest and speculation, and its cold, damp interior, into which I vainly peered through the aperture so tantalizingly left, contained for me no hint of death or decay, but in the instance of curiosity was born the madly unreasoning desire which had brought me to the hell of this confinement, spurred on by a voice which must have come from the hideous souls of the forest. I resolved to enter the beckoning gloom, in spite of the ponderous change which barred my passage. In the waning light of day, I alternately rattled the rusty impediments with a view of throwing wide the stone door, and essayed to squeeze my slight form through the space already provided, but neither plan met with success. At first curious, I was now frantic, and when in the thickening of twilight I returned to my home, I had sworn to the 100 gods of the grove that at any cost I would someday force an entrance to the black, chilly depths of that calling out to me. The physicians with the iron-gray beard, who come each day to my room, told a visitor that the decision marked the beginning of a pitiful monomania, but I will leave the final judgment to my readers when they shall have learnt all. The months following my discovery were spent in futile attempts to force the complicated padlock of the slightly open vault, and in carefully guarded inquiries regarding the nature and history of the structure. When the traditionally receptive ears of the small boy I learned much through a habitual secretiveness caused me to tell no one of my information or of my resolve. It is perhaps worth mentioning that I was not at all surprised or terrified on learning of the nature of the vault. My rather original ideas regarding life and death had caused me to associate the cold clay with the breathing body in a vague fashion, and I felt the great and sinister family of the burned-down mansion was in some way represented within the stone space. I sought to explore mumbled tales of the weird rites and godless revels of bygone years in the ancient hall gave me a new and potent interest in the tomb, before whose doors I would sit for hours at a time each day. Once I thrust a candle within the nearby closed entrance, but could see nothing save a flight of damp stone steps leading downward. The odor of the place repelled yet bewitched me. I felt I had known it before, in a past remote, beyond all recollection, beyond even my tendency of my body I now possess. The year after I first beheld the tomb, I stumbled upon a worm-eaten translation of Pulcher's Lives in the book-filled attic of my home. Reading the life of Theseus, I was much impressed by the passage telling of the great stone beneath which the boyish hero was to find his token of destiny, whenever he should become old enough to lift its enormous weight. This legend had the effect of dispelling my keenest impatience to enter the vault, for it made me feel that the time was not yet ripe. Later, I told myself I should grow to a strength and iniquity which might enable me to unfasten the heavy chained door with ease, but until then I would do better by confronting to what seemed the will of fate. Accordingly, my watches by the dark portal became less persistent, and much of my time was spent in other, though equally strange pursuits. I would sometimes rise very quietly in the night, stealing out to walk in those churchyards in place of burial from which I had been kept by my parents. What I did there, I may not say, for I am now not sure of the reality of certain things. But I know that on the day after such a nocturnal ramble, I would often astonish those about me with my knowledge of topics almost forgotten for many generations. It was after a night like this that I shocked the community with a curious conceit about the burial of the rich and celebrated Squire Brewster. A slate headstone bearing a graven skull and crossbones was slowly crumbling to powder. In a moment of childish imagination, I vowed not only that the undertaker, Goodman Simpson, had stolen the silver buckled shoes, silken hose, and satin smallcloth of the deceased before burial, but the squire himself, not fully inanimate, had turned twice in his mound-covered coffin on the day after the interment. But the idea of entering the tomb never left my thoughts, being indeed stimulated by the unexpected genealogical discovery that my own maternal ancestry possessed at least a slight link with the supposedly extinct family of the Hydes, last of my parental race. I was likewise the last of this older and more mysterious line. I began to feel the tomb was mine, and to look forward with hot eagerness to the time when I might pass within the stone door and down those slimy stone steps. In the dark, I now formed the habit of listening very intently at the slightly open portal, choosing my favorite hours of midnight stillness for the odd vigil. By the time I came of age, I had made a small clearing in the thicket before the mold-stained facade of the hillside, allowing the surrounding vegetation to encircle and overhang the space like the walls and roof of the Salvian bower. This bower was my temple, the fastened door on my shrine, and here I would lie outstretched on the mossy ground, thinking strange thoughts and dreaming strange dreams. The night of my first realization was a sultry one. I must have fallen asleep from fatigue, for it was with a distinct sense of awakening that I heard voices. Of those tones and accents, I hesitate to speak of their quality. I will not speak, but I may say that they presented certain uncanny differences in vocabulary, pronunciation, and mode of utterance. Every shade of New England dialect, from the uncouth syllables of the Peruvian colonists to the persistent rhetorics of 50 years ago, seemed represented in the shadowy colloquy. Though it was only later I noticed, in fact, at the time, indeed, my attentions was distracted from this matter by another phenomenon, a phenomenon so fleeting that I could not take oath upon its reality. I barely fancied that as I awoke, a light had been hurriedly extinguished within the sunken sepulchre. I do not think I was either astounded or panic-stricken, but I know I was greatly and permanently changed. That night, upon returning home, I went with much distractness to a rotting chest in the attic, where I found a key, which the next day unlocked with ease the barrier I had so long stormed in vain. It was in the soft glow of late afternoon that I first entered the vault of the abandoned slope. A spell was upon me, and my heart leaped with the exultation, but I ill describe. As I closed the door behind me and descended the dripping steps by the light of my lone candle, I seemed to know the way, and though the candle sputtered with the stiffening reek of the place, I felt singularly at home in the musty Channel House air. Looking about me, I beheld many marble stone slabs bearing coffins, or the remains of coffins. Some of these were sealed and intact, but others had nearly vanished, leaving the silver handles and plates isolated amidst certain curiosity heaps of Westershe dust. Upon one plate I read the name of Sir Godfrey Hyde, who had come from Sussex in 1640 and died here a few later. Its a conspicuous alcove was one fairly well preserved and untended casket, adorned with a single name, which brought to me both a smile and a shudder. An odd impulse caused me to climb up upon the broad slab, extinguish my candle, and lie down within the vacant box. In the grey light of dawn, I staggered from the vault and locked the chain door behind me. I was no longer a young man, though but 21 winters had chilled my bodily frame. Early rising villagers who observed my homeward progress looked at me strangely and marveled at the sights of ribald revelry which they saw in one whose life was known to be sober and solitary. I did not appear before my parents till after a long and refreshing sleep. Henceforward, I haunted the tomb each night, seeing, hearing, and doing things I must never reveal. My speech, always susceptible to environmental influence, was the first thing to succumb to the change, and my suddenly acquired arcanism of detection was so remarked upon. Later, a queer boldness and recklessness came into my demeanor, till I unconsciously grew to possess the bearing of a man of the world despite my lifelong seclusion. My formerly silent tongue waxed voluble with the easy grace of a Chesterfield or a godless synonymous of Rochester. I displayed a peculiar erudition utterly unlike the fantastic monkish lore over which I had pored in my youth, and covered the fly-leaves of my books with facile, impromptu epigrams, which brought up suggestions of Gay, Prior, and the slightest of the Augustan rites and rhymesters. One morning at breakfast, I came close to the disaster by declaiming in poplilicious accents of a fusion of 18th century Balchamere myth, a bit of the Georgian play fullness never recorded in a book, which ran something like this. Come hither, my lads, with the tankards of ale, and drink to the persistent before it shall fail. Pile each of your platters a mountain of beef, for 'tis the eating and drinking that brings us relief. So fill up your glass, for life soon will pass, when you're dead yelling our drink to your king or your lass. Atkinson and red nose, so they say, but whatever knows if you're happy and gay. God split me, I'd rather the wed whilst I'm here, than whilst the lily and dead half a year. So Betty, my miss, come give me a kiss, and hell, no innkeeper's daughter is quite like this. Young Harry Poppert, I was straight to the sea able, will soon lose his rig and slip under the table, but fill up your goblets and pass 'em around, better under the table than under the ground. So revel and chaff, I used to craft, under 60 feet of dirt, till easy to laugh. The finish stroke me blue, and scan me to walk, and damn me if I stand upright or talk. Here, landlord, bid Betty to summon a chair. I'll try home for a while, for my wife is not there. So lend me a hand, I'm not able to stand, but I'm gay whilst I linger on top of the land. About this time, I conceived my present fear of the fire and thunderstorms. Previously indifferent to such things, I had now an unspeakable horror of them, and would retire to the innermost recesses of the house whenever the heavens threatened an electrical display. A favorite haunt of mine during the day was the ruined cellar of the mansion that had burned down, and in this fancy I would picture the structure as if it had been in its prime. On occasion, I startled a villager by leading him confidently to a shallow sub-cellar, of whose existence I seemed to know in spite of the fact that it had been unseen and forgotten for many generations. At last came that which I had long feared. My parents, alarmed and at the altered manner of my appearance of their only son, commanded to exert over my movements a kindly espionage which threatened to result in disaster. I had told no one of my visits to the tomb, having guarded my secret's purpose with religious zeal since childhood, but now I was forced to exercise care in threading the maze of the wooden hollow, that I might throw off a possible pursuer. My key to the vault I kept suspended from a cord around my neck, its presence known only to me. I never carried out the splutter of any things I came upon whilst within the walls. One morning, as I emerged from the damp tomb and fastened the chain of the portal with none too steady hand, I beheld in the adjacent thicket the dreaded face of a watcher. Surely the end was near, for my bower was discovered, and the objection of my nocturnal journeys revealed. The man did not accost me, so I hastened home in an effort to overhear what he might report to my careworn father. Were my sojourns beyond the chained door about to be proclaimed to the world? Imagine my delight and astonishment of hearing the spine form appearance in a cautious whisper that I had spent the night in the bower outside the tomb, my sleep-filled eyes fixed upon the crevice where the padlocked portal stood ajar. But what miracle had the watcher been thus deluded? I was now convinced that a supernatural agency protected me, made me hold. By this heaven-sent circumstance, I began to resume perfect openness in going to the vault. Confident that no one could witness my entrance, for a week I tasted to the full joys of what Charles conveniently, which I must not describe. When the thing happened, and I was borne away to this accursed abode of sorrow and monotony, I should not have ventured out that night, for the taint of thunder was in the cloud, and hellish phosphorus rose from the rank swamp at the bottom of the hollow. The call of the dead, too, was different. Instead of the hillside tomb, it was a charred cellar on the crest of the slope, where presiding stamens beckoned me with an unseen finger. As I emerged from an intervening grove upon the plain before the ruin, I beheld in the mansion gone for a century once more reared its stately height to the ruptured vision. Every window ablaze with the splendor of many candles. Up the long drive rolled the coaches of the Boston gentry, whilst on foot came a numerous assemblage of pondered exquisites from the neighboring mansions. With this throng I mingled, though I knew I belonged within the host rather than with the guest. Inside the hall were music, laughter, and wine on every hand. Several faces I recognized, though I should have known them better, had been shriveled or eaten away by death and decomposition. Amidst a wild and reckless throng, in torrents from my lip and shocking smiles, gay blasphemy poured. I heeded no law of God, man, or nature. Suddenly a peal of thunderness resonated even above the din of the swinish revelry, clave the very roof, and laid a hushed fear upon the boisterous company. Red tongues of flame and searing gusts of heat engulfed the house, and the roysters, struck with terror at the desert of calamity which seemed to transcend the bounds of unguised nature, fled shrieking into the night. I alone remained, reverted to my seat by a groveling fear which I had never felt before. And then a second horror took possession of my soul. Burned alive to ashes, my body disappeared by the four winds. I might never lie in the tombs of hides. Was not my coffin prepared for me? Had I not a right to rest till eternity amongst the descendants of Sir Godfrey Hyde? I would claim my heritage of death, even though my soul goes seeking through the ages for another comparable tenant to represent it on the vacant slab in the alcoves of the vault. Jarvis Hyde should never share the sad fate of Pelarius. As the phantom of the burning house faded, I found myself screaming and struggling madly in the two arms of two men, one of whom was a spy who had followed me to the tomb. Rain was pouring in torrents, and upon the southern horizon were flashes of lightning that had so lately passed over our heads. My father, his face lined with sorrow, stood by, as I shouted my demands to be laid within the tomb, frequently admonishing my captors to treat me as gently as they could. A blackened circle on the floor of the ruined cellar told of a violent stroke from the heavens, and from this spot a group of curious villagers with lanterns were prying a small box of antique workmanship which the thunderbolt had brought to light. Ceasing my futile, now objectless writhing, I watched the specters as they viewed the treasure trove, and was permitted to share in their discoveries. The box, whose fastenings were broken by the stroke, which had unearthed it, contained many papers and objects of values, but I had eyes for only one thing alone. It was a porcelain miniature of a young man in a smartly corded bagwig, and bore the initials J.H. The face was such that as I gazed, I might as well have been studying my mirror. On the following day, I was brought to this room, with the barred windows, and I have been kept informed of certain things, through an aged and simple mind servitor when I bore a fondness of infancy, and who, like me, loves the churchyard. What I have dared related to my experiences within the vault had brought me only pity smiles. My father, who visited me frequently, declares that at no time did I pass the chain portal, and swears that the rusted padlock had not been touched for 50 years. When he examined it, he even says that all the village knew of my journeys to the tomb, and that I was often watched as I slept in the bower outside the grim facade, my half-open eyes fixed on the crevice that leads in the interior. Against these assertions, I have no tangible proof to offer, since the key to the padlock was lost in the struggle on that night of horrors. The strange things of the past, which I learnt during those nocturnal meetings with the dead, had dismissed as the fruits of my lifelong and omnivorous browsing amongst the ancient volumes of my family library. Had it not been for the old servant of Hiram, I should have by this time become quite convinced of my madness, but Hiram, loyal to the last, has held faith in me, and has done that which impels me to make public at least a part of my story. A week ago he burst open the lock which changed the doors of the tomb perpetually ajar, descended with a lantern into the murky depths, and on a slab in an alcove he found an old but empty coffin, whose tarnished plates bears the single word, Jarvis. In that coffin and in that vault had promised me I shall be buried. Such concludes H.P. Lovecraft's The Tomb. I got cold chills reading that. I really thought towards the end that he was just on the brink of madness, but the coffin having his name, the deliriums that pertain in this tomb, are just too otherworldly to be ignored. I love the world building too, how we really got to understand that the grove was just gnarled beyond repair, and that coffin was all that could keep him. I also love the touch that they added with the Jarvis being the only name. He didn't get to keep the Hyde's last name, but he was still family to them nonetheless. What demon or entity possessed him to crawl inside a coffin at night and sleep? Would you do the same? I don't think that I could, even if I was enthralled with madness. Leave your comments below, and feel free to like and subscribe. And until next time, my Lovecraftians, bye-bye.